Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network. Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over. Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Sophie from You're in Good Company, welcome onto the Australian Finance Podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
It is great to have you. Very first appearance on the podcast. So I want to start with, what is something you've purchased recently that's added value or boosted your happiness?
It's not a product. It's probably more of a service. I did buy a trip with my girlfriends. We went away for a weekend to Queenstown, which is in New Zealand. We found really, really cheap flights, really cheap accommodation, like $50 each for 4 nights.
Wow.
And it just brought me so much happiness because I feel like I haven't been able to do a lot of international travel. And so just like getting on a plane where you had to bring out your passport was really exciting.
No, that would have been fun. And I'd be keen to hear, before we jump into the rest of the episode, if you've got any tips on how to manage the cost of living crisis at the moment.
I feel like at the moment that saying that, you count your pennies and the pounds will look after themselves is kind of really relevant at the moment. At the beginning of the year, I did a bit of a deep dive into my expenses, which sounds like a lot of work, but really I just downloaded a couple of like monthly bank statements and kind of assessed where most of my money was going. Or alternatively, there's like amazing bank apps that do that for you now. And what I've been doing to kind of manage like cost of living is just cutting out things that are super unnecessary. So like, for example, one of my big things was I always go to the IGA at lunchtime and buy like a snack, like, I don't know, just something like
even cheese and crackers.
Yeah,
that's
cheese and crackers, or like, some fruit or some lollies or whatever else. But like, it's so much more expensive at the IGA. I should just include that in my weekly shop and bring it in. Or like a can of tuna. For some reason, the cans of tuna are so much more expensive at IGAs. Like just buy them at Aldi where they're $1 compared to like $4. So one of my big tips would just be like, do an assess of some of your finances and just try and cut out those little pennies that, accumulate to pounds, I guess.
Yeah, all those small weekly extra top-up shops do add up, because I've got an IGA like 5 minutes walk from me. I don't have a car, and then the Coles is about half an hour walk. And so if I have missed something, I just go to the IGA when it's nearly double the price to just get the basics.
100%. Even like, because I go to Aldi now, I shop at Aldi. That's another tip. Like their mincemeat and stuff is just so much cheaper. And maybe like, I'm not a food connoisseur. People might be like, ew, that's so gross. But like, it's just so much cheaper. So just like swapping out, I guess, where you can to a cheaper product, or just getting rid of expenses that you don't need.
Are you a meal prepper?
Yes, I have to meal prep. Because like when you're busy, like it's so hard I want to eat good food, and I don't want to come home and it to be like 7 p.m. and then not eat till like 8:30. So like I'm someone that cuts up my veggies for dinners at the beginning on a Sunday night so that I can just chuck them in the oven and not have to like think about it.
Yeah.
Such a meal prepper.
No, there's big value in that, especially coming home late from work, or if you're going to uni after work, in my case, and I get home and if I have not prepared, it's really just an egg on toast every time.
Or you order takeout and then that's just, that accumulates.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people haven't listened to your wonderful podcast that's part of the Equity Mates empire, but definitely stands on its own 2 feet, You're in Good Company, are you able to give us a little bit of background to you and the podcast and that journey?
So the podcast isn't just me. It's also with one of my really good friends, Maddie Guest. So we started this podcast called You're in Good Company. We were chatting before almost 3 years ago now, which is crazy. And the aim of the podcast really is to make investing accessible for everyone. Mads and I 3 years ago were talking about how we felt like we didn't have anyone to speak to about, money generally, but also investing. We had both started our investing journeys, but I didn't feel like I could go to the pub and like sit with my girlfriends and be like, oh my God, look at like Tesla, like what's happening to the stock price. They'd all look at me and be like, what?
What are you talking about? Why?
Why do you care?
Yeah.
And so I think we noticed that there was a bit of a gap in the market for friendly, fun, entertaining conversation, just documenting our journey. We're not experts by any means, but I think over the past 3 years we've kind of grown with our journey, and it's just documented like how we learn, and we've brought on experts to teach us. And now we're at the point where, we're just having like fun conversations about companies we love, but also branched out into other content, like more general money content, entrepreneurship. But that's the basis of the podcast.
Yeah, because you've got a really interesting series going on at the moment on the show.
So a couple of months back, we had an incredible guest on, Cathie Wood, who is one of the biggest investors, in the world, one of our idols. And she kind of really reinvigorated for Maddie and I, like investing in single companies. I think with the backdrop of everything that's happening in the economy at the moment, I've been a little bit more reserved with my investing, sticking to the ETFs, just trying to be consistent, but also not wanting to branch out too much because I'm nervous. But after the conversation with Cathie, she kind of was talking about how it's so exciting. The future of investing is so exciting. So we thought, why not put together a series where we start jumping back into companies that people love and actually deep diving into why they would be good investments or bad investments. So looking at companies like L'Oreal, Uniqlo, Tesla, and it's been so much fun just like getting back into like the good old, like deep diving into a company and working out whether it's a good investment or not.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about being curious when it comes to the world around you, and investing is one way to apply that in a way that you can actually get a return from if you do find an interesting company. Has doing all this research for the podcast helped you make any investments in the last year?
Yes. I mean, it's probably been the premise. I use the podcast to do my investing research pretty much. Like we speak to so many guests. Yeah, 100%. Like one of my probably most recent investments, well, actually maybe a year ago now, was Tesla. And that really came from the podcast because we were speaking to so many people about the company. And I think a part of research is obviously like, going online, reading books, listening to podcasts, whatever else, but just like engaging in so many conversations, it kind of helped me build up an investment thesis for it. So definitely the podcast helps with like investing research.
Were you investing way before the podcast? What was your journey into investing?
So I started investing before the podcast, yes, maybe a year before the podcast. And it was because of my partner. He was investing at the time in Afterpay, and he was chatting with all his friends about investing in Afterpay. This is when it was
like the Australian Tesla a few years ago.
Yeah, it's like the
everyone was talking about
the Australian, darling, and then now not so much darling, but anyway. But he was saying like, oh, you should be investing. Like, you went to uni and studied commerce, and like, don't you know about finance and stuff? And I'm like, I went to uni and studied commerce, but I don't know anything about investing. Like, it's just so not correlated. And so he kind of helped me, set up a brokerage app. And so, I would never recommend just listen to your partner and invest in what they do. But that's honestly what I did because I had no idea. And then the investment did really well. And I was like, oh my God, investing is so cool. You can make so much
boost of confidence.
Yeah, so much money, which turned into investing in heaps of risky high-tech stocks, which we always joke about, which I've made losses on for sure. But that's kind of where the journey started. And then I guess, as we say to people all the time, once you have money in the market yourself, it makes you engage with investing a lot more, and then your journey kind of just unfolds with time. So I went the opposite route of what we say to a lot of people, but investing in high-tech risky stocks, and now I've moved more into like building out my core ETF portfolio. But over the past maybe 4 years now, it's just developed with everything that we've been learning.
Yeah, I think it's really important to share that because a lot of listeners think they should have everything perfect and sorted before they take that first step. But I had a very similar journey at the start. I just sort of jumped in. I was buying companies that were building jetpacks. I looked that company up this morning and it went into liquidation a few years ago. But I was just jumping in and out of things. But that was part of my learning journey, and I kept those mistakes really small because I was only playing with a small amount of money because I didn't have a lot of money when I got started. And I guess the risk is you do what we did, but with a huge amount of money.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I always find this funny because we have a lot of people ask us like, do you have recommendations for financial advisors, etc. In our Facebook group, we now have a thread of them. And I'm always like, if I had so much money, I would probably give it to a financial advisor because I would just be so worried about like doing it myself with such big sums of money. But I guess my journey thus far has been putting in, $1,000 a month or $500 a month. It's just little bits that grow over time, so I feel safe with them. And when I was starting at the very beginning, I was putting in like $100 a month, almost nothing. So I feel, if you are investing, you only put in what you are willing to lose. And so although, I mean, a lot of those stocks are just at like zero now. So I've lost it, but you only lose it if you sell it. So hopefully they come back.
You're still hanging on.
Well, there's not much you can do when it's sitting at zero. You could sell it for $0.
Yeah. But I guess your story also highlights something else, that someone else helped you take that first step. And that's a really important part of community and what we can do once we've sort of put our own oxygen mask on, we've sorted out our own core portfolio, we've got our emergency fund. We can actually, without giving advice, but we can prompt our friends and family to take that first step as well.
Yeah, and that was the whole premise of the podcast, really. We felt like, so I had my partner when I started, Maddie had her brother. They started investing together just before COVID. And that was the premise. We said it was really useful that we had someone by our side to ask those questions, because people think the questions are so dumb that they don't want to ask them. Just as simple as like, oh, where do I invest? We get that all the time. And then, you talk about brokerage apps, but for so many people that's so unfamiliar, but being able to ask, that's really helpful. And that's why, I guess we started the podcast.
Yeah, and especially if you didn't grow up in a household where it was common language that you purchased assets. I'm thankful that I grew up with parents that did talk about buying assets instead of just buying material items, even if they didn't really say what or how. I had to figure that out for myself. But I think just bringing people along with you is really important. I'm glad you're doing that with the podcast. What about any challenges you face? Sort of, you had that person to help you take that first step, but what do you think, were there any roadblocks along the way that you faced?
I think obviously roadblocks, like when you lose money, it's really daunting, because I was also investing a lot during that period, which was COVID, where, a lot of stocks were going up. So then when you do see it go down, you have to readjust how you think about risk and how you think about your money, because when all is going well, you're happy just to like chuck it all in. I think that was a really good time to stop and reflect and be like, okay, what am I investing in? And I need to like cement my strategy for the long term. So I wouldn't call it a block. I would call it maybe just a bit of a reassessment of my risk tolerance, because you think your risk tolerance is quite high, and then the minute your money goes down, it lowers a little bit.
Do you remember what you were thinking at the time when you saw the high risk specky investments that you made fall in value for the first time? I think I was just like, yeah, it serves me right. Like, I didn't do the research into these. Yeah.
It was honestly at the very beginning of my journey. I was just listening to friends. I was so excited by it. As I said, I saw Afterpay go up so much. I was like, this is so cool. And so I just listened to anyone and everyone. And I think seeing it go down was like, reality check. Like, listen to your own advice that you're putting in the podcast. You need to research your own investments. You need to know where you're putting your money. Like, it sounds daunting, but it's not. It's engaging. Like, engage with companies that you know and love. Don't invest in, as you said, jetpacks, because I don't know anything about the jetpack industry. Why am I going to stay engaged with that? So it was just a bit of a reality check, which I think for the long term, because I've still got age on my side, albeit you can invest at any age, that I just reassessed and made a strategy that works for me.
Yeah, so you'd spend a lot more time now researching any individual company before you purchase shares in it.
Yes, and I won't touch industries that I know nothing about, because what's the point? I'm not going to start looking up news about, I don't know what comes to mind, like mining or something. I'm not engaged with that, so why would I invest in it?
Yeah. What about investing in your career as someone who's relatively young? How do you think about that, the time and money you might be putting into that area of your life?
Yeah, so I guess investing in my career so the podcast is one part of my career. Then the other part is I work in M&A advisory. And I think one of the best things about the podcast thus far, but you can also do it outside of having a side hustle, is networking. Mm. I love going to events. And, if you're engaged in the kind of investing world or startup space, there's so many cool brands like Startmate and, Airtree. They run all these young people pioneer events. And just going and meeting people and listening to their stories. There was a night I went to in Melbourne for a VC firm, and I was just like, I just went and listened to founders and had chats to them about their founder story. And I think it's a great way to invest in your career, because you never know where that conversation is going to take you, or when you might need advice from someone that's outside your current group. So networking, a lot of people always ask where you start with networking. So I would just say finding resources that are in your local area, like, as I said, the Startmate or the Airtree or, you know, whatever you're interested in, and just trying to see if they have events and going to them and taking yourself out of the comfort zone.
Yeah. Yeah. Even just in meetup groups and things like that. There's a lot of like those the websites you mentioned. If you subscribe to their newsletter, then you hear about programs they're running, and whatever industry you're working in and wherever you want to learn about, there's probably something there for you.
Yeah. And even if you at your work, asking people at work who are in the industry or asking them if they know any contacts or events that are being run more broadly, because usually people that are higher up will have a bit of a better intel of like where you can source new information.
Yeah, and there's a lot of value to talking to people in your workplace. Most people want to share their tips and tricks and their strategies. Whether they're any good or not is another question, but if you ask them and you're curious, most people want to help.
Yeah, 100%. You can identify those people so quickly. Yeah. Usually the louder ones around the office.
Yeah, and I've found personally going in with curiosity and just like, I want to learn from you. I've got some questions, because people like to know why you want to meet them. They don't want to just like coffee because they think you're asking for a job or something like that. But if you go in prepared and you've got a good elevator pitch, most people are willing to give you the time.
That's so true. I feel like LinkedIn, everyone's like, oh, just network on LinkedIn. And when I heard that first, I'm like, what do you mean? Do I just ping random people? Like, I feel really bad for like getting in their space. But LinkedIn's actually a funny place. I feel like everyone's very willing. And like I even had a girl message me the other day just about she's wanting to get into, you know, the finance industry in Melbourne. And so she sent me a message and I said, can we just jump on a call? Because I mean, I hate texting and typing. It's just annoying. But I was like, I don't know you, so we don't have to get a coffee necessarily, but we can just jump on a call, and that's so fun, and I'm happy to chat through things like that. So, I mean, never feel afraid to reach out. If you get rejected, then whatever, move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about having money conversations? Because that's something I've been thinking a lot more about recently. Has there been any strategies that have worked for you when engaging with friends and family about money?
Yeah, so interesting you ask, because Maddie and I have actually moved into this space a little bit. We have noticed maybe over the past 6 months that people are asking us more and more to have general money chats, because I guess the economic overlay of, you know, people trying to cut their costs and whatever else and having these difficult money conversations. So we're actually going to be doing a series asking all about taboo money topics.
Yep.
And we piloted this at an event. How long ago? A couple of months ago now. We went to the Vogue Code Summit, which was all for women in STEM. And we built these little chatter boxes to ask like funny money questions. And people were so willing to have those conversations. I think money is an area that people still find really taboo, but you almost like want to be asked the awkward question, because everyone wants to talk about it, even though it's a taboo thing. I think if you're struggling to have those money conversations, and so many people do, because, as said, it is taboo, I think the best way to approach it is asking like their opinion first, almost like going into like a really casual conversation. Like you don't necessarily have to schedule like a money conversation, but
I'm not sure that might be the best approach.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, when I moved in with my partner, I'm like, we are doing money conversation from 9 a.m. till 10 a.m. because we're working out our finances. But I mean, I'm a very headstrong person and I work in the industry. So he's like, okay. But yeah, just like, you know, if you want to have chats with girlfriends about money, you know, having it over a glass of wine and being like, oh, what are your thoughts about like wedding presents? Like how much are you contributing? Like what's normal? Like bringing it in a casual way can be quite helpful, similar with family as well.
What were some of the taboo questions you're asking in your chatterbox?
So one of them was like, why do we take the price tags off gifts before we give them to people? Oh. Yeah, so like really trying to think of like, why is this money mentality of like it's taboo to have a gift? Like shouldn't a gift be about giving rather than the price tag? Or how much could you spend if you were with a partner on a joint account without them saying something, being like, well, that's too much? Or would you show your friend your bank account like right now if they asked you, like why or why not? Just trying to delve into, you know, why people feel maybe shame around money or why they feel so excited about money either way. I think it just kind of like starts the thinking around maybe where your money ideals have come from, and then also understanding that other people have different values and opinions as well. So if you want to broach a conversation, it kind of gives you the tools to do so.
Yeah.
So the series is really going to be about how we if you want to have these money conversations, how you can approach them. So we're going to be asking them on the series and then kind of talking through our own experiences, getting guests on as well, but then also getting an understanding of like what's the best way to broach the conversation.
That'll be fascinating because none of those questions probably have a very clear answer, and everyone would see it quite differently, and it would really depend on their own experiences and the situation and who they're in a couple with.
The funniest answer that we kept getting at this Vogue Code Summit about the price tag one was, well, if it's an expensive gift, I leave the price tag on. And if it's not expensive or it's on sale, I take the price tag off.
Really?
And I was like, that's just so good. Like, yeah, I think the conversation starters really opened my eyes to how differently people think about money. So I guess that's the point of having, those conversations.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to that because there are so many of those conversations we just don't have. But I think everyone wants to know what everyone else thinks on those topics.
Yeah.
And what about the founder series you've been running recently? Were there any takeaways or things that really stuck with you from speaking to these awesome business owners?
The founder series was the most amazing series because we spoke with so many incredible Australian entrepreneurs about their journeys and they had amazing insights. I think a couple of things that stuck with me were, if you are wanting to start a business, one of the ones that Kate Morris, who is the founder of Adore Beauty and now Glow Capital, she said that the idea that is the right idea for you to start a business is the one that lodges itself in your soul. And I really loved that because I think a lot of people that are interested in startups or entrepreneurship are like, I just need to start a business and it needs to be the right time and let me just start. I want to be a founder. But she was really pointing to the fact that you need to be so passionate about what you do because it does take over your life for a lot of it. Once you get to a certain point, you've got a good management team in place, you can take a step back. But the Adore Beauty story, they started over 20 years ago. So it wasn't an overnight success. And then the other one was Laura Henshaw, who's the founder of Kick. And what I really loved about chatting with her was we were talking about that they were going to investors to raise money for their business. And we were talking about, did you find that experience daunting if you didn't have a finance background? And a lot of what she was saying was that she felt like she really needed to be accountable for learning the stuff that was in their presentations. She's like, you can hire an amazing CFO and that's great, but at the end of the day, they're your numbers. And I loved that because I love that accountability of like, people might say that you're not financially literate or you don't have the right background, but really there's so many resources that you can learn from today in any medium. If you love books, read books. If you love podcasts, listen to podcasts, videos, etc. And I just love that because it's like gets rid of that victim mentality of like, oh, I never grew up knowing about, or learning about this kind of stuff. I thought that was a really cool aspect of take accountability of your own business and what you're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of changes that anyone can make, whether they're big or small, with their own finances. And even if you outsource some of it to an accountant or a financial advisor, which we're all fully in support of, finding a good one and using them, you still need to have some control and oversight because at the end of the day, it is your money.
Exactly. So yeah, loved those perspectives. But all of the chats were just so great. I loved Lucy Henry Hicks, who's the founder of Dish, the clothing brand. She's brought aspects of her mum journey into the business, being a part of a program called Encoreship, which helps women get back into the workplace after taking time out of the workforce. And I just love speaking to them because they're all so passionate, but they also all bring different elements of, I guess, their personalities into what you can see that their businesses are today. So yeah, if you want to go have a listen, they're all incredible stories.
Did you see any commonalities between all of these founders?
Yeah, probably a lot of passion, very well educated and they're just, I don't know how to explain it, but you get into a room with someone who started a business and they're just so energetic and they're so passionate about what they're talking about. And I love that energy that came from, incredible female entrepreneurs in Australia.
Has that inspired you or made you think more about starting your own business one day?
Yeah, I would love to. But I think it's like that passion piece, right? Like right now in my career, I love what I do. And so I'm not in any rush. I think like definitely inspired to do something one day. But I think with a lot of conversations that I have with mentors, it's like, you know, a business doesn't need to be started right now. Like when you've got the feeling that you need to do it, then you can do it. And I mean, the podcast is a little baby on its own, which takes up more than enough time. So growing this has been an absolute delight, you know, the networking that it brings, the conversations we get to have. Building this up has been amazing as well.
And that's probably one of the great things about your 20s. You can experiment and try lots of different things. You don't need to just have it all figured out.
Yes. Yeah. And also, I mean, one commonality between all the founders was like, you won't have a life for 10 years if you want it to be a good business. You're like, yeah, cool.
So it's the what are you prepared to sacrifice kind of question.
Exactly.
What about your favourite money and investing resources? Because I'm sure you come across a lot within your community and all the research you do for the podcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've mentioned a couple of times that, you know, there's so many different resources out there. And I think if you do want to be investing, it's good to find a medium that you love because it means you'll actually do the research. I personally am a podcast person. Like Maddie, for example, also is a podcast person, but she loves books as well. Like I'm not so much on the book side. But finding that medium, I think for me, podcasts like stories of companies, so something like Business Wars by Wandery or How I Built This by Guy Raz. They kind of talk with founders. Well, Business Wars talks about the background of businesses, whereas How I Built This talks to founders and about how they started businesses. I mean, it gives you a great overview of companies if you're looking to invest in them. But then also just being up to date with like broader economic trends, because I think that really helps in understanding where your investments are going and like the landscapes or industries you could be investing in. So I listen to the FT news briefing every morning, and a very specific investing one is Invest Like the Best with Patrick.
That's a really good one.
O'Shaughnessy. So very, very broad, but also like if you love watching Netflix, like you can go on Netflix and watch. There's so many shows now about companies and scandals and whatever else. So I think finding your medium is a really important thing.
I'm definitely drawn to the frauds and scams, podcasts, documentaries, books. I don't know what it is, but it's just fascinating how they all play out.
And video is so good because they like edit it. It's like so many snips and you're like, oh, I'm taken on a journey. Yeah.
I'd like to think it hopefully doesn't. It helps me avoid falling prey to scams and frauds in the future, but very smart people fall prey to these things all the time, so I'm not so sure.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
And before we wrap up today, I'd love to know the number one thing you'd love to leave listeners with from this conversation or just from your own journey.
God, that's hard. Like one thing.
It can be two if you want.
Well, that's even harder. Oh, God, I actually could say multiple things, but I guess if you are investing, I think one of the best things, or just, I don't know, with any general thing, and I say this to a lot of people that are starting also careers, is just to, I mean, even though I'm also at the beginning of my career, I sound like this old person that's like, yeah, but just like read and like investigate broad and wide. I think education is like so important. We spoke about investing in career before, also investing in yourself. I think if you're passionate about something, educate yourself on it. You know, there's courses for everything these days. But yeah, read broad and wide and just like get a sense of the world. I think it really helps with career, your investing, you know, multiple facets. And this is something that someone important said to me once, but if you read up or, you know, podcast up on a topic that you don't really know about but want to learn about, you never know if that's going to be able to be dropped in a conversation with someone important down the line and they'll be like, oh, that's really interesting that you know about, which leads to a conversation, which leads to an opportunity down the track. So I think being in a little bubble sometimes can feel safe, but educating yourself on things that you might not know a lot about brings a lot of value down the line. It might not happen right now, but I think that it's important just generally with investing in career.
Yeah, push yourself. Sometimes it might be a bit hard to get your head around it, but take in lots of resources and expand the way you can see a particular industry or world.
Yeah, like a really good example at the moment is like AI, because obviously like AI is everywhere and a lot of it's very confusing because I swear, you know, if you go into like the little details of it all, very confusing. But just like understanding the general environment, you know, finding podcasts or reading books about it, I think it will help because it's going to really alter, you know, what our careers might look like in the future, what our whole lives might look like. So sometimes it seems scary and I have chats with people and they're like, oh, I don't want to know about it. Like it's just too much. But I think being aware of these things and being in the know can actually help you shape your career or your investing journey.
Wonderful. Well, everyone can find you on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the other podcast players. You're in good company. Is there any other places you'd like listeners to check out?
We have our Instagram and TikTok. TikTok is failing, but we are trying.
TikTok's a whole nother world.
It's a great medium. I love it myself, but God, making them is difficult. But we are YIGC Podcast on both of those. And we also have our Facebook group, YIGC Investing Podcast Discussion Group, where people ask questions and it can be a safe space for you. So please feel free to join that one as well.
Amazing. Well, Soph, thank you so much for joining me in the studio in Melbourne today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.